Human morality and ethics is a bit of a complicated subject for our species. The reality is, while we feel genuine guidance by our conscience on a personal level, for one reason or another, if you get enough of us into a group together, questionable events can take place that would lead us to otherwise betray these values and ideas that at one point we held close. A discussion of the human psychology and the ideas that drive us is one that has been prevalent all throughout human history. In an effort to protect ourselves actually from the reality that each of us is capable of being an absolute chode to other members of society, it has been seen a lot that people will actually refer to the perpetrators as either like a monster or villain in some way or inhuman that makes it unobtainable for them, but only obtainable by the person who did it. Surely no other person, the person holding these morality views so close, could ever be capable of such horrors. But the reality is, every individual on this rock is entirely proficient in dropping the horrible hammer on another person. In the events of Scorn, most everything shown is said to be left up to interpretation. What is the parasite? What is elevating consciousness? What are the creatures that roam around, and why did you actually choose to scoop out the mold man instead of cut him out of his shell? All of these things allegedly exist without too much explanation as to why they are the way that they are. Until now. Society by and large has gone completely to crap. The idea is that the ethics of humanity appear to have been abandoned long ago, and when in the movements of the protagonist, a freshly born creature into the world, are observed, you'd think it wouldn't understand how things work, but it shows that there is a more aggressive side of human nature has basically completely taken over. In an effort to power and fuel their world, creatures had to be made in order to allow for the process to continue. But if you look at the context clues, it highlights something fairly horrific. So in today's episode, let's discuss what is the purpose of the mold men, and what has happened to them has basically shown an incredibly douchey turn for humanity at some point in time. But before moving on, I want to thank you guys for watching. If you enjoyed, then leave me a like, it would be awesome of you, because without you guys, none of this would even be possible. So if we want to continue Scorn, I'm just gonna farm the hell out of this. Please leave a like. I don't really have a goal, but it's, let's just say 20,000, I guess. I don't know. We'll go on to the homunculus after this either way, but a like would be appreciated. Anyways, check out Roanoke Tales channel for cryptids and true crime stuff. It's basically an amalgamation of whatever I find interesting. Also check out Discord for movies that we watch there that end up here. Links for both of those in the description. So, I think we should start, as always, from the beginning, as what the mold men are made from is going to shed more light on the parallels between the denizens of Polis and the mold men that they have created, so to speak. Upon waking up as the first protagonist, you really have no idea what's going on or where you even came from, at least that's how it appears. With no dialogue anywhere in the game, there is nothing we can verbally take from this creature to understand it, but its movements and aggression when dealing with other forms of life show there could either be a complete disregard for other life or a potential level of malice. I'm inclined to believe it's just disregard, sort of like when I smack my printer because it's not working. Although I'm pretty sure I wouldn't smack my printer if it was actually alive, but you get the point. So as you need to open the door to escape into the next area, so you can elevate your consciousness, whatever that means, you must head up to the egg room, where you will meet what is known as a mold man, individual to the mold men. They're not made of mold, but we'll get there. Pulling the first one off the wall, you accidentally completely bisect it as its flesh appears to have been bonded to the actual wall itself because it was left there for so long. Finally, solving the puzzle that didn't take 15 minutes with a 7-minute break to not crash out over my inability to solve puzzles, the creature is lowered into the lower areas of this machine, assembly line. Before you lies a few options at this point. Will you be a huge tool, or will you only be a slightly huge tool? Which way, Western man? As you wheel the creature down onto the track, it's clear there are several things going on here. First, this creature is quite conscious. Its limbs are fully functional, it has a nervous system, it can see, think, and evidently feel. When you bring it to the hole puncher 9000, it attempts to push the machine away as something happens to its shell, and this is evidently fairly painful. Now, really this comes into question, is it better to let something live and expire slowly, or take it out quickly and never give it a chance to maybe overcome the trials it would face in an effort to survive? There's really no right answer on what to do. However, I say the more right answer is you just let it live and maybe it'll pull it off. Stranger things have happened. Of course, given all the desiccated bodies in the area and them, there's some that clearly were alive that just kind of dropped, it doesn't look like they're exactly going to survive, so it's quite unlikely it has the mental faculties to keep going, and the fact that it even follows you later on kind of shows that its level of thinking is not very high. possibly we're talking like youngling status. So taking it over to the body scooper 10,000, the creature is dispatched quickly as it scoops come down onto its head and into its body, taking off its arm and then putting it down into a hidey hole, which is a fate we will discuss here later on. Grabbing its arm that falls off, you attach the key to it and you're able to open the door by yourself with no further issue. The other option is to saw the shell off its back. Changing the tracks once more, you can take it over to the saw, which is placed face down. Of course, the whole process is ungainly and just outright wild, given that even the saw doesn't really do that good of a job. This is very clearly like a slaughterhouse scenario. While it does remove the shell off of the moldman's back, it still cuts him further, injuring the creature in the process. At this point, the creature's physical limitations become clear. Having been there for quite some time, its limbs have become atrophied and it will struggle to stand. More concerningly, it naturally makes its way to the protagonist, which it's not a great plan for it, but it's pretty much all it knows. It's like ingrained with this. We see when the creature falls down in front of the stabbing key applicator, the protagonist straight manhandles the absolute crap out of it. Even with the horrific process completed, it will still continue to follow the protagonist all the way to the door panels, where the protagonist will once again manhandle it to the key panel. With the door now open, the protagonist is free to walk through, but the Moldman is stuck attached to the panel, likely permanently there until it meets its end as well through exposure. The Moldman is a creature that has a specific fate no matter what the case is. It appears with humanity at this point, which, make no mistake, the planet you are on is Earth, at some distant point in the future where it appears the surface is nothing but desert and all vegetation has ceased to thrive. Which, let's talk about that for a moment, because this is an assured event and this might actually be able to give some clue as to how far advanced humanity is at this point. The issue with Earth is things are great right now, and have been at least for the last few billion years. The first few billion years absolutely sucked though. I wouldn't want to go back there or be in my apartment during that time. Essentially, the sun will continue to grow and expand and increase in luminosity over the next billion years. As the Earth exits out of the Goldilocks zone of our solar system, it's likely the same thing that happened with Venus is going to happen here, or so we think. See, a long time ago, possibly even as close as 740 million years ago actually, Venus was somewhat in the habitable range. It is quite possible there were oceans, given that if you took all the water vapor in the planet's atmosphere, you could actually cover the entire surface with a puddle a few inches thick. Of course, given the varying topography of the area, this could actually have led to shallow oceans in some places, and then in others, there was just dry land quite easily. It is entirely possible that while Venus was on the warmer side of the Goldilocks zone, it would have been quite tropical all over the entire world, but fairly survivable. Now, did life arise from this era of Venus? It's really hard to say. The global repaving through volcanism really has eliminated all evidence of what may have been originally there, but from what we can tell with the atmosphere, there could have been water on a warm planet. Of course, the hurricanes would have gone absolutely hard if this was the case, or at least if there was enough water to fuel it. But then, as the sun entered middle age, it began to warm up Venus quite a lot. This, coupled with what we assume to be a massive outgassing from the core, which led to all the volcanism, or the volcanism led to this, it just absolutely led to the planet getting lost in the sauce concerning putting out carbon dioxide. These two events would raise the planet's temperature to become the hottest planet in the solar system, which some people confuse with Mercury. Mercury is close, but Venus is much hotter. Sort of blows, because if Venus and Mars were actually to trade places, who knows, it may have been a pretty viable planet given it holds heat pretty well. Our species can really only guess at this though, so the problem is we won't be moving planets anytime soon. So the same thing is going to happen to Earth. It's not a question of if, but a question of when. We appear to be in the latter half of this planet's viability stage, so either humanity gets it right and leaves this rock, or all life that came from this world got stuck on this world. No pressure. Within the next billion years, the Goldilocks zone will actually move further out to around Mars, and then even further past that as the sun becomes a red giant. We're not entirely sure if it will expand enough to consume Earth or not, but as it gets hotter and brighter, the oceans will start to evaporate. As this happens, it'll rain a lot at first, but eventually the atmosphere will just become more and more oppressive. As the process continues, plants and life as we know it will get choked out by the weight of the atmosphere until eventually the sun will start to boil the water away from the surface entirely, and then even from the atmosphere. So at this point, the Earth will just be a giant desert and will look nothing like it does now as continents continue to drift and crash into one another, and the entire surface will be completely unrecognizable as there will be no plants or water, and even the color of the sky will change as a result. Basically just a giant dust bowl. Also, completely unrelated, but what may be interesting around this time is I mean, as long as we don't go the Dead Space route and completely mine the living crap out of Titan, at the very end of the sun's lifespan, for possibly a few 100 million years, Titan may be close enough to the Goldilocks zone, or even in it, to start developing into something that could be considered a second Earth, as it will be receiving enough of the solar radiation. We know now it's very similar to a primordial Earth back in the day when the sun was much more dim and cooler as nuclear fusion had just only started getting started. Wow, what a way to say that. So that could be the next habitable world for humanity if we do get to that point. Of course, truth be told, if we are that far in the future and we haven't left the solar system, we are likely doomed anyhow. Or we could just be ultra chads and then take Earth and move it out, possibly even transporting it to another system just for the lulz and to flex. That would also be pretty cool. Like, imagine moving your home planet out of the line of fire just because you're technologically capable of doing so. Hopefully one day we get to that point. Anyhow, so you may be asking yourself, Roanoke, was all this conversation about the sun dying out really necessary? And I believe it is, because it explains what the mold men even are in the first place and why the horrors are never ending, yet still the denizens of Polis remain silly. So to move in the direction that we need to, first things first that you need to understand is the Scorn art book has a lot of information that actually shows what is going on. The mold men were an integral part of Polis society. As mentioned, they either run the technology or they fuel it. And like I said, considering one of them just gets thrown down a hidey hole to become the meat, I think how they possibly fuel it is some of their body gets used obviously to create the machinery, while some of their body just gets put back into their own genesis wall, but we'll kind of get there in a second. So in one way or another, much like with the organic machinery and everything else here that it's basically bodily fluid based, like the first protagonist gets totally destroyed by the fluids, the mold men appear to be creatures that actually compose these machinations, but what's interesting is genetically they are near identical to the Polis people. But before going down that rabbit hole, we need to talk about the mold men to see why the situation is totally screwed. So starting with the feet, we see the skin of the mold men has fused several toes together, but the digit's still number 5. The feet have a plantigrade structuring much like humans do, which means they come from persistent hunters. And as we go up the leg, we do see that their feet are disproportionately large to a degree. Being much larger than the rest of the body basically would suggest that they should be. The legs are plantigrade structuring with forward-facing knees, but the muscles become atrophied given their time in their shells. The reason they are called moldmen is because when they are bred from the eggs, which contain several moldmen, they are placed in these molds in order to prevent them from growing properly. Instead, their flesh will fuse with the mold that they are contained within, and if there's another in there with them, they will also fuse together there as well. They are said to be somewhat sticky, at least concerning their feeling, indicating that the skin has a light adhesion to one another, so that their skin cells will actually attempt to attach to other skin cells as well, which makes them able to stick together, but could also be a genetic trait due to the fact that they need to form this organic machinery, so they need to stick together. This weakly defined line between the skin barriers also highlights gene tampering within the moldmen, as this would not naturally occur, at least in nature. Anyhow, as we move further up, the legs have atrophied and are quite skinny. I'm not really sure why I said atrophy, but the pelvic region, there is not necessarily anything to speak of concerning gear, but this is not entirely true concerning the art book. In the art book, the ones that are clearly male have suffered trauma in the area and have wounds concerning the lower pelvic region, consistent with gear possibly once being there and then removed. The female mold men, or the mold women, appear to maintain their setup, but with the males subdued, there's no threat of natural reproduction. As we move up to the abdomen and thoracic region, it's not uncommon to see signs of surgery or damage to the body. The reasoning here is that, once again, it should be known the mold men genetically are almost identical to the people of Polis. So not only is their flesh used as fuel and evidently becomes machinery, while alive, organs can be harvested and given to the Polis people who may need it to survive. In some instances, entire limbs will be missing from the mold men, but in the case of the one in the art, we can see, like at least in game, all the limbs are accounted for, but concerning being a male, that is also not present. In terms of females in the book, there are mammary glands indicating that not only are there sexes in the mold men, but there's clearly a level of sexual dimorphism as well. Moving down the arms, we see they're quite long, longer than what would be considered normal for a creature this size. And the hands themselves are much like the feet, larger in that they don't really need to be this size, but these creatures are naturally stunted in terms of height, well, unnaturally stunted in terms of height, because it is quite intentional, but their feet and hands grew like they were going to be larger. As we move up to the head, in some ways in-game, it's hard to tell or really get a full grasp of how large they are, as the head is fused with the shoulder due to the developing within the mold. However, those who were not stuck in there for that long have a head that is proportional to their limbs and feet. Basically, it's much larger. Their eyes are quite large with huge irises. They appear to not really have a mouth, much like the denizens of Polis, and their nose is largely absent as well. However, the art book shows that they do have a mouth, but again, there appears to be some differences between what you see in game versus what you see in the book. So as we move in game to the back of the creature, the damage is extensive from being separated from the mold that it has lived in its whole life. The moldmen are covered in skin in some cases, but it is largely damaged. In terms of the game, the damage runs so deep that the spinal column can be exposed to the open air. When looking at the freed moldman, not only is the skeleton completely malformed due to being placed in the mold, especially to the point of inducing kyphosis, but the cervical area does not have the standard curve in the neck, and instead it is completely bent over to the right to the shoulder. The damage to the body is extensive, but if humanity at this point had removed all aggressive bacteria on the planet as suggested in my last video, this would indicate that these wounds, while grievous, may not become infected, in which case they could be survivable but quite painful. Overall, taking a look at the moldmen, it shows signs that these beings got a bad shake concerning their roles in society. Now, however, we need to talk about where they actually came from and why humanity appears to have lost its way at some point in the past. One of the more disturbing aspects about the moldmen existing is this genetic compatibility with the people of Polis. Now, it's hard to really concretely confirm these details as not much is known, but here's what we do know. First, they look like humans from Polis, so that's not great. Second, they are subjected to absolute horrors concerning their formation, which is quite painful because clearly they have a nervous system. Third, they're used callously for fuel for the society and machinery, or they're just outright used as slave labor. And fourth, their bodies are literally created to house organs in case the Polis citizen would need to use it. So, what do I believe these are? Well, let's talk about the possibility of projection concerning our own technology with the future. It's no secret that on this channel, the gene editing, specifically using CRISPR, or clustered regularly interspaced short palindromic repeats, is the bread and butter of things that I like to talk about. That and anglerfish, but really that's just me talking about them because I need to tell you why I hate them and why you should hate them too. Anyhow, CRISPR essentially is a gene editing tool utilizing the Cas9 protein complex that evolved within bacteria in order to deal with viral invasions. Every day, around 20% of all bacteria in the ocean is taken out by basically viral infections. Eventually, this protein complex evolved to seek out incoming mRNA strands to determine if they were viruses, basically implanting into the bacteria. If it was found to be a match, it would then chop it up and remove it. What was interesting was the same process could be used in our own gene sequences to remove damaged genes and then implant new ones. Once again, however, I always like to point out that my friend who became a geneticist was finding that cells would actually be replacing the good gene that they just implanted with the original copy that was dysfunctional. So this maybe seems to imply there's a genetic memory of sorts. I'm sure the research is way further along now to identifying what that is, given that it was 2018 when him and I spoke about this. Anyhow, by using this method, it's possible within the human race we may be able to eliminate genetic issues within our species. In fact, Kyrgyzstan did an excellent video over this, but essentially this could pave the way for a line of thinking that we need to be very careful about, and those are known as designer babies. Those that have the money to do so could literally end up designing their offspring to be more attractive, taller, more hair, more muscle, a better intellect, basically altering their genes to fit a role of what society would consider to be attractive. Which, if we look at what happened to the denizens of Polis, it starts to not become a question of if they did that, but how they did that. The people of Polis, while being related to humans, are absolutely bizarre looking to the point that it's not likely that this was just something that sprung up from natural drives. This was a direct intervention by the human race to change how they looked towards something that was considered to be attractive. Literally almost no body fat, clearly defined muscles under what has basically become a translucent skin that at first was probably just a thinner or tighter skin to highlight these features. They also are taller. If you stand next to a moldman, you are much taller. They are clearly more intelligent, and as millions of years have passed, the species would change themselves little by little until it was no longer really clear what they were supposed to originally look like, which is how they ended up becoming what they are. These designer babies would reproduce at a faster rate than the homegrown humans until potentially a tipping point was reached. When this happened, the humans who were designed, having lost a lot of their humanity, would probably start to look at natural homegrown humans as less than them. The Polis people had ascended in their minds to a new species, which left the question, what do we do with the natural born people? And this is what became of those who were not genetically influenced by tampering towards some goal. The moldmen are simply a genetic strain of humanity that still exists naturally occurring. The people of Polis are a strain that is aesthetically existing, but their own genetic coding is still having them be predominantly human. And because of this, the organs can be taken from the more natural strain of humans and used in the Polis people, which this part is rather interesting because if we look at the moldmen, there is a hypothesis out there that this is what we may look like in the future. Our heads will become larger, our eyes will actually expand as well, our bodies would not need to be as stocky as they are now, and we would really trend towards looking like the Greys concerning like what the aliens look like. That's allegedly what we might end up looking like. This matches up with how the moldmen look now. Like they continue down a path of natural genetics. However, the Polis people continue down a path of altered genetics due to their own predilections, which ultimately resulted in two vastly different looking sides of the species. Eventually, these two strains of DNA would be removed from the natural breeding process. The people of Polis would come from a genesis wall using the DNA that their side of the species tampered with to create more like them, which would be traditionally attractive in their eyes due to the changes that were made. And I mean, they do have a 25-foot statue of them eating tail to prove that they do like the way that they look. So concerning the moldmen, their own genesis wall are just the slops on the ground that they appear to congeal out of. Probably after certain portions of their body are used, some of the genetic material is returned back to the ground genesis wall. That's just kind of what becomes them. So rather than form out like an entire individual, it appears eggs form out of it that then house the moldmen, and given the process isn't exactly meeting up to the same standards as likely the genesis wall that creates the people of Polis, mistakes happen, but the process just continues regardless, since the fate of the moldmen and what they will experience is not really a kind one, so it's not really, I guess, concerning the Polis people, that big of a deal. So to wrap this up, the moldmen to me appear to be a natural form of human that largely would have run to completion, but the other side of humanity tampered with themselves, and that created these two delineating lines. The issue is that moldmen likely would be quite normal looking and more proportional if they were not shoved into shells that in turn deform their bodies and then forever alter them. Because they are not what the Polis people deem as true humans, as is typical with human patterns, they're likely deemed not human at all, and because of this, they would meet grisly fates quite regularly. Also, their intelligence would have been hampered by the fact that they are grown so quickly, there likely is some form of gene issue that is arising within their population in general. So what I find most interesting though is the way the Polis people tend to treat them having just come from the genesis wall, which highlights how even those completely new to this thing called life have a superiority complex and are born not to feel much of anything concerning the moldmen despite the complete relation between the two sides of the species. One born out of nature and one born out of vanity. But anyhow, I want to hear what you guys think about my explanation for the moldmen. To me, it makes the most amount of sense why they even exist in the first place. But with that, I want to thank you guys for watching. If you enjoyed, then leave a like would be great as it helps get the video out there. And subscribing is also extremely baller, as in 2025, I'm trying to get to 1.25 million subs. If you want to help me get there, that would be awesome. I'll drop my Twitter, Discord, Patreon, and Roanoke Tales and Games link in the description. But speaking of patrons, I'd like to thank mine real quick. First, I'd like to thank our astronauts, Army and Tristan Kessick. Thank you guys for your awesome support. Next, I'd like to thank our astrophysicist, Death Dancer, and Feather. Thank you guys as well. And to my scientists, Dakota23, Invictus Echo, Metric System, Official Texan. I do appreciate y'all's support as well. And to the rest of my patrons, you guys are super cool. It helps keep everything running smoothly and is greatly appreciated. All right, so that's gonna do it for me. I hope everyone enjoyed, and I will see y'all in the next one.